everybody, and welcome to North 100, a Canadian Highlander podcast. I'm Serge. Joining me on the show today, I have a Jer
Hello.
and a Wheeler.
Bazinga.
A reminder that North 100 is brought to you by you with your support over the Patreon at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Let's start with our opening segment. The best card that you're not playing and up to date is me. And I want to tell you about a little artifact called the Sword of Light and Shadow. 3 mana artifact equipment. Casts for 3, equips for 2. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from white and black. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you gain 3 life, and you may return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Now, a lot of people all agree that sort of Fire and Ice is the best sword. A lot of people are then like, if you want to play more than one sword, you should consider maybe putting in Feast and Famine, protection from green and black, relevant creature types there. And the discard and untap are also pretty powerful, but you should really be considering Sword of Light and Shadow in your equipment package. I love it. Protection from white and black, not the best, but when it's good, it's really good. But in a creature-heavy matchup, that 3 life is very good. And especially if you're playing into removal or if you're trading creatures early, the ability to return a creature from your graveyard to your hand and get some more gas and keep that foot down on the gas pedal is very powerful. Jaron Wheeler, what do you think?
I actually think the protection's one of the best parts of this sword, especially pro white is often game winning in creature matchups, and pro black is typically very good in control matchups, and white is often good in control matchups as well.
Yeah, it's like if you put it on anything with some amount of bulk, and like I'm being pretty generous, basically 2 toughness or higher, that increase that the sword is going to apply also, I mean, kind of gives it a hex proof from red. There's a lot of air finger quoting going on here. But like it gets it out of burn range, and so then when you're out of burn range, you can't get swords or hit with like an eliminate or something like that. And then also your thing is again bigger, so you can fight up against bulkier green cards. So like it ends up doing just a lot of work with making your thing survive. The one downside to this sword, I'm a huge fan of it. Lord, do I ever love her, Raise Dead. The one awkward part is that you're like kind of inclined to include a card like this in, say, like white aggressive decks or white X aggressive decks. And having pro white can lead to the occasional oopsie doopsie scenario where you'd really like to activate your Mother of Runes or Giver of Runes,
right? Yeah.
and you can't. So just kind of keep that in mind. But other than that, like, heck yeah, like even gaining 3 life, that's kind of cool. I'll do that occasionally.
Yeah, like if you're going even against an aggressive deck, often slamming this on when you have 5 mana can just sort of lock up the game, getting back like an effective early creature and gaining 3.
This isn't a sexy sword. It doesn't do anything flashy, right? You're not shocking things. You're not drawing cards. You're not really affecting the board all that much, but the amount of advantage you can accrue, especially as the game goes later, I think this is probably one of the worst swords to cheat out early. Like this isn't like a Mox or Mana Crypt start, right? Like you're not feeling that great.
Yeah, like this is definitely a sword where you will run into scenarios where you're just like, this isn't really doing much, is it? But I mean, if a game has progressed a bit, or you just like catch your opponent off guard and be able to play and equip and get a triggered ability off of this, like the turn of this can, swing games. And it gets better, the longer these games go. Whereas stuff like War and Peace just kind of, I mean, War and Peace and even Feast and Famine, right? Feast and Famine often kind of seen as the second best sword. Late game, like it can kind of just be not a real thing.
You're both top decking. You both have 1,000,000 mana. You don't really care what the abilities do there.
Yeah, you need to fight for the board, not the
Yeah.
hands.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about today's topic. Today, we are going to talk about tutors. For those of you who listened to our Q&A episode last week, this won't come as a surprise because we're like, wow, we have a lot to say on this topic. Let's add more. Now, whenever we do a deep dive in any particular topic, I like to start with a definition. Jer, what is a tutor?
a card or an ability that lets you search your library for another card and gives you access to it now or very soon. So either puts it on top of your deck or puts it into a zone where you can access it, like your graveyard, the hand, or the battlefield.
Something we didn't get to really cover in the Q&A episode. The question was, when I tutor, I have trouble deciding what to pick. You have decision paralysis because something like Demonic Tutor, and then you have 99 other cards in your deck to look at. You're like, what do I pick? But I think an even more important starting point on that, especially in our format, is actually at deck construction of, should I even include tutors in my deck? Obviously, it sounds very powerful. Wow, this one card finds anything in my deck or any selection of things. There's no downside. Why would I ever not play tutors?
Well, there are certain decks that kind of thrive off of redundancy, in the sense of, I mean, it can be both very linear decks, but also like you can use this to look at certain kind of slower controlling decks as well. But I mean, mono red's obviously the biggest kind of like locked in as why like obviously there's gamble, who am I kidding,
Maybe.
but it's just like, in for decks like that, why would you play, like, what are you going to tutor for, right? You're probably going to, if you played a tutor in a red deck like that, you would probably look for your best burn spell, Price of Progress, Fire Blast, whatever it may be. But that's more, you're paying more mana to set that up, where you should just be playing another bolt or another creature, something that every card in your deck is looking to replicate, and instead, get some of your more niche utility cards or utility effects when they're like stapled to a reasonable body already.
If I could add a question to that, what is the opportunity cost to playing a tutor? If you want redundancy, doesn't it make sense? Okay, if I want my deck to do the same thing every time, shouldn't I put in as many tutors as possible so that I can get that experience?
The biggest cost of playing tutors is that by and large they're tempo negative. So you're spending mana and you're not impacting the board in a meaningful way with that mana you're spent. So like if you want to do something the same turn, it's going to be a lower cost play than you could have otherwise made. So decks, as Ben mentioned, decks that can't afford tempo negative plays, especially early game, typically aren't going to play as many or any tutors. Like control decks can't afford to spend the early turns tapping out, setting up, unless they're like mystical tutoring for a terminus, which is a very large tempo positive play for the control deck. So they're counteracting the tempo negative tutor with a very large tempo gain. And red decks just don't have the option to do that. So they don't spend the early turns tutoring. They just apply pressure and can't afford the tempo loss.
I think that's a really important thing to consider when you're making your deck, is when to play or when not to play it. And I think this is something that comes up a lot in the discussion of points, right? You're like, you have 10 points to play. I don't know what to do. I've got 6 points. Should I just throw Demonic Tutor in my deck? Like, is it just an auto include?
Well, I mean, that's not the worst thing in the world, is if you're like, oh, I don't like, I've got these extra points. Well, I guess I could play demonic. Like, even some of the aggro decks, the linear decks, will play tutors, right? Be it mono black, which if somebody's playing mono black and they don't, they got some extra points laying around, demonic tutor in that kind of deck might be fine, because there will be more variance in the threats and disruption that kind of deck can play. So, like, you're not going to have 10 Goblin Guides and 10 Earthshaker Kenras in mono black. You'll have like a handful of Carnophages, and then you'll just take whatever playable creature they've tried to
Please.
give us. Yeah,
Please.
exactly. I mean, they've done great recently, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely a thing. But they do have, playing a deck like that, you do have more flexibility, where you could DT for like Sinkhole or Strip Mine to take care of like a pesky Tolarian Academy. You could find up like a Thoughtseize, Cling to Dust for graveyard hate. And these are kind of cards that, if I mean, every build isn't necessarily going to play these, but it's an option that you can play, and is kind of one of the reasons why you would sleeve up a non-red aggro deck, right? Is because you have that ability to kind of go off your main goal slightly to try and accomplish something else without, slamming the brakes.
Let's examine then what decks want to play tutors, and I think more importantly, why. Why do you want to play tutors?
I really love Black Lotus, and I want to see it as much as possible.
All right. There's no other copies of Black Lotus. There's no redundancy for that effect that you can find when deck building.
Well, no, there is Lion's Eye Diamond. Love that card to bits. But sometimes you just need Lotus in particular. Sometimes you need something to use with your Lotus. I mean, I've always said this: Black Lotus, not that great of a card because it can't even attack your opponent. What a worthless card. But no, combo. That's the idea. Combo's the more obvious.
I really just love collector oof, and sometimes you gotta find a big oof.
So you just need a silver bullet.
Yeah. And I think those are the two biggest reasons you include a higher density of tutors in your deck, is either you're kind of like a toolbox silver bullet deck, or you're a combo deck that's looking to assemble a specific combination of cards to win the game.
Yeah, because again, we're a singleton format, and redundancy tends to be pretty powerful in Magic. Even for our format, you end up seeing some of the most powerful decks across its entire history are the ones that are able to stick to a certain game plan and repeat it as much as possible without any kind of resistance or tripping up. And tutors help kind of obviously they help reduce the redundancy, but that can also play onto the other side. So again, it's not just being like, all right, here we go, I got a tutor, so I'll always have my dark ritual. That it plays to the other side of like, oh, well, I do have a collector oof or an Aven Mind Sensor in my deck, but I also have a bunch of like Fleece Mane Lions. So I'm going to want to have the option to be able to find the oof in the right match. But sometimes I might just use this to find, you could do better than Fleece Mane Lion, but you get my point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Should we move on to the next part of that, or is there anything else you'd like to add in this particular moment of when to include tutors?
I will say that when you're playing a very tutor heavy deck, I think it's okay to not slam every single tutor. They've kind of they've really grasped that, hey, tutors are pretty strong, like even for constructed formats where you have four ofs. So maybe we shouldn't constantly have, really flexible, powerful tutors. Like the impact of like Finale of Devastation from War of the Spark, it's X green green. You tutor for any creature CMC X or less from your library or graveyard. There's other text, but that's the important part. That card for like a four of kind of format is like, it's good. It saw play, but now for us, it's just like a godsend every time we receive those kind of effects. And so when you're adding a good tutor, don't just feel like you should push out a non-tutor card. Like you will have to cut your Bring Delight in some cases. You'll have to cut your Wargate. You'll have to cut your Grim Tutor at times, right?
Worldly tutor.
I'm feeling very attacked right now.
Yeah, I swear to God, I wasn't going for you.
I know.
This is more me like apologizing to all the tutors that I've cut from various eggs builds. But yeah, Jer has the best example, honestly, is Worldly Tutor. Like, I will probably get to those later in the episode, but those are that's like a great option of a card that people like stick to, like they're a fly on, fly paper. But maybe bench it once in a while.
Jeremy, final thoughts on when to include tutors?
I think we covered most of it. Just like as Ben mentioned, is just like don't feel you need to jam in tutors. Just like often decks have have built-in redundancy in the archetype, and you like tutors don't necessarily lead to you winning more games.
All right, well, let's go back to the question that started this all, which is how do you get around analysis paralysis of tutors when you're new to a deck? And of course, for an answer just on that, check out episode 102, which I did previously. But I think that's a great point to look here. What do you actually tutor for now that you've included these? And I mean, I guess that's probably an important thing to think about when you're actually building the deck and including tutors.
Like, so I mean, this is going to be a wide open,
It's very broad. It's very broad. Yeah, go ahead.
like, before just getting it out of the way. The answer that is really unsatisfying, that is the correct answer, is you should tutor for the best card for either that situation or a situation you are looking to build. And now collectively, everybody at home has went, thanks, Ben. Very, very helpful.
So very Machiavellian there. Just tutor for the right thing if you win, and if you tutored wrong, it was the wrong tutor.
I think by and large, or how I look at it at least, is there's two scenarios. You're either tutoring proactively or reactively, and certain decks do those scenarios more often than not. Like in Control, you're typically tutoring reactively, typically getting like a key removal spell or a wrath or a counter spell.
I think that feels easier.
It is easier. By the time you're tutoring proactively, it doesn't really matter. Like the game should be in such a good point. By the time you get to tutor proactively, like it doesn't really matter what you do. But tutoring proactively is harder because most of the time you don't know what your opponent can do to try to stop you. And once you tutor, like, well, while the demonic tutor in your hand, it's Schrodinger's box. It could
be anything, right?
You know?
Yeah.
But once you actually lock it in and go get the Black Lotus or go get the Yogwill or go get Collector Oof, and then your opponent plays Urza instead of Cart Clan Ironworks.
Yeah. And you're like, oh no, what have I done? You just blew my mind, Jer. You just blew my mind. Because obviously there's easy parts. There's easy tutors when you're super far ahead. You're like, my opponent has nothing on board, no cards in hand. I just tutor for the card, I win on the spot. Or you're like, I need to draw exactly a wrath or I'm dead here. Oh, hey, it's my tutor that finds a wrath. GG, easy. But there's that tremendous amount of in between where you're like, okay, I'm 3 turns away from dead. Can I have this tutor right now. I can go find one of the 2 cards I need and hope to get lucky, or do I find like a medium threat to try and stabilize the board, but I only have this one demonic tutor in my deck. I can't win on the spot. I don't have a great reactive answer. Do I like live the dream and try and like maybe draw another tutor or draw the other combo piece? Do I do nothing and just hold on to this tutor and wait for a sign from my deck? You know, just pray. You're like, okay, well, if I draw the other half of the combo, then I tutor for piece A. Or if I draw piece removal, then I know I can tutor for the other thing. Like, I think that's the cone of indecision that people get trapped in, right? Those blinders of like, I can't look outside of the current board state to see what a possible answer is because I'm so stuck just examining what's happening right in front of me right now.
And that just comes from knowing your deck and knowing like how many of each thing you have in your deck, knowing what you're more likely to draw and playing percentages. Like just because you make the correct decision doesn't mean it will always work out.
Yeah, like you can get punished. Like it's not, people will often be like, you tutor for one thing or you make this call, right? And then you get punished by maybe like a one of, or obviously a one of, but you get punished by like a very specific card or series of cards. And then they can get into their own head and kind of be like, oh, I really punted that tutor. It's like, well, no, because like when you're making these calls to cast these tutors, right, or to make any play in the game, right, it's about narrowing down to the best possible line that you could take, or trying to figure out which line is going to give you the best chance of winning. And sometimes they just happen to have it. I mean, that's cowboy magic, right? Like you just, make them have it.
I guess there's in a lot of other projects, there's a way to perfectly achieve failure. You can do everything right and still lose. And I think a lot of people have difficulty separating their own decisions in the game from the outcome of the game.
Yeah.
And to take it really personally, be like, oh, I made these mistakes. And like, no, you can play your deck perfectly. You can play all the lines to the highest percentage possible and still just lose.
Welcome to every combo deck that I've tried to play in my entire history.
It goes the other way too. Like you can win games and not necessarily be playing
Oh, have any
optimally
business
or
winning, right? Yeah.
anywhere close. That's why the best players go back and analyze games. They both win and lose to determine mistakes.
This is what I want to clarify when I, make that, when I made the joke. Well, I say joke, but it's genuinely true. But it's just like that is the biggest thing, is that like personally, I don't put too much stock on like an end result for a tournament or series of tournaments, because it's just like I could win. World Gorger Dragon combo is a great example. There's this World Gorger Reanimator Dragon or World Gorger Dragon Reanimator combo deck that I threw together. This was like, I want to say 2 years ago, but I'm scared that it's earlier than that. And I ended up like winning 2 events with it, or maybe Omnitel is a better example. But basically, you take this deck. I won some local events with it, like within like relatively close succession, and turns out the deck was just bad, and I also was not good. I guess the deck was bad, and I wasn't. I obviously I wasn't going to pilot it perfectly, but there were things that I could have done before entering the tournament to make it better. There are things I could have done during the tournament to certainly make it better. But sometimes it just works out in your favor because, I mean, if you're playing like a combo deck, you're looking to achieve something pretty powerful, right? That's the whole reason behind playing those kind of decks, is that the combination of these pieces that are seemingly insignificant are going to lead to something that is just insurmountable, right? An infinite loop, a massive demon that draws you a bajillion cards on turn 2. But that deck was just not good. And for a while, I was like kind of convinced that it was good.
Yeah, that they're like, it turns out there's just some powerful 7s in there, and you got lucky a bunch in a row.
Yeah, and then current counselor Robin Sorensen started playing the deck, and he was like, oh, I just can't seem to I can't really win with this, dude. And I was just like, oh, well, I mean, have you tried this and this? And then there was like a period where we were both playing it. It was like, oh man, you know what? I think this deck's just not very good. It's just bad. But I want to quickly talk about what you had said, Serge, where you're like, what do I do? What do I tutor for if I feel like I'm dying in like 2 to 3 turns?
Yeah, like not immediately when the reactive answer isn't apparent, right?
Right. I think that there are a lot of lines in some of the top combo decks that you'll find in the format that can kind of achieve both. Like, unless there's a sense of immediacy with either your own kind of like resources, you don't have enough mana, you don't have enough actual raw cards to do a thing. You can occasionally afford to like the classic tutor for a tutor. But ideally, like the example I'm going to use is like you tutor for Trinket Mage, and you play Trinket Mage to find your Lotus, Black Lotus or Lion's Eye Diamond. So you like are tutoring for a card that'll end up winning the game for you if you can get the corresponding piece, but you're doing it in a way that also provides a bit of a road bump for them, which can be pretty helpful. And there are other examples that you can use for this, but sometimes like if you have the flexibility to tutor in such a way that plays around a certain series of things or into the board, or like provides a little bit of
Like know the matchup, I guess. Know the matchup, know your deck, right?
that's a huge part of tutoring, right? Is knowing your deck and knowing your opponent's deck. Arguably that's the most important part.
So there was a really interesting thing that came about our previous discussion. This was a point that Jer raised, is the idea of if you're going to when you're actually at the deck construction phase, when you're putting a tutor into your deck, come up with a tutor package. Come up with a short list in your head of just like, all right, whenever I grab mystical tutor, here's the first 3 to 5 cards I have. Can we just talk about like how you come up with that tutor package, why you come up with that tutor package?
Well, in different decks, you'll have specific needs. Basically, like in control decks, typically you need to keep the board clear, and you need to stop problematic permanents from ever entering play, which typically means planeswalkers.
I like the language there. I like the language there.
And so you use your tutors typically to find cards that help accomplish those things. So your tutors typically need to be able to find wraths or specific removal spells, or like versatile spells that can remove the problem thing. And then typically you just deal with winning the game later. In combo decks, depending on the type of combo deck, you need to find a specific few cards. So like in Time Vault, you need to find a 2 mana cost artifact and another thing which can be one of 7 different cards of varying types and costs. So the bulk of your tutors are going to be spent finding the 2 cost artifacts. You're going to include artifact tutors and transmute 2 spells. So then once you've included artifact tutors and transmute 2 spells, you want to try to fit, so say Time Vault's part A, you want to find a part B that can also be found with artifact tutors and transmute 2 spells if possible. And that's sort of how you start building the lists in those decks, if that makes sense. Like you figure out the thing you need the most, and then you try to fit, like create as much overlap as possible.
I like your tutor list here is counterintuitive to what I thought. So when I hear tutor list, and this is just my own brain, I'm like, okay, demonic tutor, I write down 5 cards to find a demonic tutor. And you seem to present something different. You say, I want to find Time Vault. And so when I make my deck, I'm actually going to create a list of tutors that finds Time Vault. And then I know that I want to find cards that interact with Time Vault. So then I'm going to include tutors that find the second piece. So that's interesting. That's actually turning my entire assumption on its head there. Fascinating.
That goes back to like when to include tutors. And like you don't just throw tutors in any deck. You include tutors with a purpose. And so you have to have the purpose before you know what tutors to include in your deck, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you have anything to add on that, Wheeler?
I want to kind of break it down. Well, not break it down. So there's like, this might get a little bit referential, but there was like a little bit of a meme called Flowchart Ken for like Street Fighter players.
Okay.
That was basically just about like a specific character being pretty easy to grasp, and they're effectively being a flowchart of, did this happen, yes or no? And if yes, you do A, and if no, you do B. And it kind of creates this web. It's a flowchart, right? And I think that even though the meme that I brought up about that is, was used in like a derogatory way, it's still something that I use for like building combo decks, where it's just kind of like, you got to start off with the very basic thing. It's like, all right, I'm going to win. So how do or like, I want to win the game. So how am I going to do this? And then you just start, at one point. It's like, do I have a Cart Clan Ironworks? Yes, no. And it's like, I do? Great. Do I have Scrap Trawler? Yes, no. I don't? Then I have to find Scrap Trawler by this.
Then, yeah.
Or you can, typically I look at as, I don't have this piece, so what other piece do I have that can win the game in its place? And then that's how you end up creating these, I've called it like a spider web before. Like it's like the garbage platter kind of theory.
Sure.
Where it's just like that overlap of all these various pieces fulfilling similar but slightly different roles, so that you can make the most out of your tutors by always having something available to accomplish your end game, but also having something available to spice it up or work around any kind of disruption or kind of like retort from your opponent that you may not have predicted. So like you have your straightforward, do I have Lotus? Do I have Bomberman? Hey, congratulations, I got there. But when that doesn't happen, that's when you start looking for like other, you start have to ask yourself like, okay, if I don't have this, I'm looking for this kind of piece
Yeah.
instead. And how can I find that piece?
Well, a question for you and Jer specifically on how to find that piece is, how do you identify that when you're learning a deck, when you're getting new to it? And is this something that you've literally written down, or is this just something that you have to internalize through making repetitions with the deck?
A little bit of both. Like some will be more obvious than others.
I love in Highlander when you're like, I never saw this line before. I never pictured that if I had piece A and B and I do like steps C through F, I've got this new loop that I never knew I could win with. Like, there's the time you never see the line and you learn a new one. And that's my favorite moment in Highlander. But like, uh?
Yeah, those ones probably don't come super easy, and that's probably best learned through repetition. But there's a lot of deck specialists out there by this point, and the Highlander community by and large is super open and friendly. So trying to like hit up someone who's jammed, like there are lots of people who have jammed greater than 1,000 games on deck X. So just talk to them and be like, what do you usually do with this? And most of them will be able to give you like several examples, and then you write those down, and then you might, because your play style or build might be slightly different, you may be able to change that over time.
For the longest time, I'm actually trying to see if I still have it. I think it was on an older computer, but I had like a document of eggs kills, like eggs loops.
Love it. Love it.
Because like, I mean, honestly, it's just mostly practice, goldfishing, like memorizing like certain roles of cards, and like writing it down. I was originally writing it down to share with people that were asking about stuff, because when you do a certain thing enough in your head, it's like, oh yeah, so anyways, I had the like KCI Opal ringed salvagers combo, and they're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. We need you to go back like 30 layers deeper, my dude. Dumb it down a bit,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And so writing it out helps. I wrote them out to share with people so that I, wasn't just blathering like an idiot. Didn't help that much in that aspect, but like writing it out also helped me kind of just grasp this, like, okay, so this part of the combo, like it's fulfilling this kind of role. Are there any other cards that can do that? And being like, oh, wait, yes, there are. And like finding out that there were, cards that could fill the role of, for this example, Mox Opal. And then even stuff like coming up with cards, like looking for something to fill that role and be like, oh, that doesn't work because I'm 1 mana short. Be like, oh, well, if I am 1 mana short, like, is there something else I can do? And so just writing it down is super important, and kind of just like trying to break down why your things do what they do. Because like once you start really figuring out why your deck has these cards and why your deck has this like this line or this configuration, your tutors become so much better because you start thinking outside the box.
Yeah, I did a similar thing when I was playing Doomsday. Like when you couldn't play Lotus and DT together, so the deck was actually hard to play.
Yeah, Doomsday is the like classic
flowchart deck
for, yeah, well, for legacy communities for Doomsday and like vintage Doomsday, there are like spreadsheets upon spreadsheets.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, Highlander is actually like way more expansive too. Like I started doing one and it's crazy. All the lines and permutations you have.
Amazing.
Yeah, when you don't have access to like multiple LEDs or multiple like dark rituals or whatever, you're like, oh, I've got to figure something out, especially if you've,
or even just the density of free draw spells. Like you can't just like go like
get probe, yeah,
probe, gush, etc. Or like, yeah.
So I have a tutor question, and it's going to start with a bit of a story, and I'm sure some listeners may relate, but Ben and Jer are both better at Magic than me, so maybe they won't. So I was playing a game against Wheeler, and I had a Leyline of the Void in play, and I cast an Enlightened Tutor, And Wheeler's like, oh, guess I'm just dead. And then in my head, I was like, what does he mean just dead? I wasn't going to tutor for a card that was going to kill him. Oh no. And I like, in my mind, I immediately already knew what I was going to tutor for ahead of time, and it was the wrong card because Wheeler, my opponent, saw a line where he was just dead using the same tutor, and I had already decided something because of flowchart beside of play experience. So when is it better to be flexible? When is it better to cast your tutor and look through every card in your deck to make sure you're not about to make a mistake? And the card that Wheeler saw that I didn't at the time was Helm of Obedience. Because if I just found Helm, Wheeler's dead. And I was like, Oblivion Ring. I need to answer this permanent on the board, right?
I mean, everybody's going to tunnel and make mistakes occasionally. Like it happens. But most of the time you should try to look through your deck and just use your notes and references as like, well, if I don't see anything better than number one on the list, I will get number one on the list. Like, you should try to like think and analyze and use your critical thinking skills, because that's how you improve and you make yourself faster and better at using these cards.
I had a game against Allison a long time ago where she was, of course, playing Golgari, and she had like a bunch of 3/3s on the board, maybe 2/2 zombies. Totally tapped out, nothing to do. Passes back to me, and I have a Zealous Conscripts in play and a Vampiric Tutor. And I have a bunch of mana. And I like vamped end a turn. And I was so tunnel visioned on being like, these zombies are going to kill me. I have to figure out something. That I tutored for Toxic Deluge or something. And I was just like, okay, this is, well, I guess I survive. It's not great, but I guess I survive. When I should have just got, like Splinter Twin, Jiki, like literally anything that my deck was designed to do. So yeah, I mean, everybody's going to fall victim to tunnel vision.
Like, everybody has a story where either they or themselves bolted a creature with
the opponent said 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was this one time Serge had a kill, but he enlightened tutor for Oblivion Ring against me. Yeah. It was so weird.
Woo! All right, let's talk about our final major topic and the subject of tutors, and that's different type of tutors. And I mean, not every tutor finds every card, and not every tutor actually functions the same way. And we've got, for example, repeatable tutors with legs, top of the deck tutors. Are there advantages? Which ones? Is there a type that's always better than the other type? Should we go through them one at a time? How do you want to tackle this? What's the best kind of tutor? What's the best kind of tutor?
Well, the best types of tutors are the tutors that don't have restrictions. They're unrestricted. They get you any card and they put it into your hand. So that's
play.
Or play. Yeah.
I'll just play all of those.
Yeah, so like the more restricted a tutor is, typically the worse it is. The easier you can access the card you get, typically the better the tutor is. So like Demonic Tutor is widely regarded as the best tutor because it finds any card and puts it into your hand, which is a zone that's very easy to access for you. I'm of the view that the tutors that put creature cards into play are much better than the tutors in. This is a much more nuanced discussion, and I'm biased, but the creature tutors that put creatures into play are much better than the creature tutors that put creatures into your hand. They're typically more expensive because you're literally getting the creature in essence for free. But yeah, so it's like all to do with restrictions and like availability.
So like Wheeler had an interesting line earlier of, DT for Trinket Mage for the Lotus instead of just grabbing it immediately. Like, what is the value of a tutor with legs? Imperial Recruiter, any of the other ones there, overplaying a different card. Is there a time when you'd rather have creature tutors rather than just the spell version?
Well, there's a little card I like to call Spell Seeker.
Go on.
That is a hell of a magic card.
Above average.
What is Spell Seeker if people aren't familiar?
I'm glad you asked, Serge. Spell Seeker is 2 in a blue for, I believe, a human wizard.
Yep.
Although...
Yep.
Doesn't look like a human.
Yep.
Or a wizard. Kind of look like an artificer, but...
Okay, well, we don't have time for that, but yes, I agree. 1/1, when it ETBs, you can search your library for an instant or sorcery with CMC 2 or less, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Now, Ephemerate is a instant.
Really dumb magic card.
In this case, it's an instant where it's a 1 white, exile target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control, and it has rebound. So one of the big things about creature tutors, or like permanent based tutors, like on tutors on that stick to the board, is that they get to play around with all the different types of spells that can interact with them. So if it's a creature, one of the biggest strengths of Spellseeker is that if the card itself finds a card that then flickers it to get another tutor, and then you're off to the circus. Like, the fact that it sticks in play lets you utilize all these other cards that can either reanimate creatures,
Blink.
again, bounce creatures, blink creatures, even stuff that like sacrifices creatures.
And this sort of goes back to the points discussion as well. And this is a way to sort of pay 0 points and get the effects of the pointed tutors, is because it essentially turns all your creature tutors into like spell tutors with like these other cards.
Like Imperial Recruiter can find Kiki Jiki, and then you play the Kiki Jiki, it copies the Recruiter to find Pestermite. Like, they tend to, basically for every onboard tutor, it takes, varying levels of mana, turns, cards, but they can all basically just go from point A to point you're dead.
That's a good point to be in a game, yeah.
Yeah, but like, again, it's not like Recruiter for Kiki for Pestermite, that's 11 mana, and a bunch of it's red.
And it's a lot harder for spells to do that.
Yeah.
Single-handedly.
But you don't, the thing is, you don't necessarily have to do it immediately, right? Like, if you play out an Imperial Recruiter and find Kiki Jiki, you're fine. You could just sit. You got this one that you can use with other cards you may have included, or even something as simple as like pressure planeswalkers, pressure your opponent.
Block.
Yeah, they're tutors,
Block.
But they're also
Powerful
creatures.
word.
Yeah, exactly. Like, here's my Academy Rector.
Attack
have
into
fun
me.
attacking.
Yeah, dare.
Yeah.
Oh, the Rector. I love it. So a final question here on a type of tutor, like a very classic type of tutor that's increasingly falling out of favor, is top of deck tutors. I'd like to throw to Jer for a definition and explanation on how this mechanic works.
So top of the deck tutor, the classic one is probably Vampiric Tutor, where you search for, in this case, any card and put it on top of your deck. They're often cheaper and at instant speed relative to sorcery speed to their other counterparts. Sometimes they're also sorcery and expensive, such as Cruel Tutor.
Poor. Let's talk about Cruel Tutor for a second here. Poor Cruel Tutor.
What do you mean, poor Cruel Tutor? Like, if anything, we shouldn't talk about it so that people. I mean, now it doesn't matter. People will look up what this card does, but it is
3
so
mana sorcery,
bad.
2 and a black. Search your deck for any card. Put the card on top of your deck and lose 2 life. It seems worse than Vampiric in a couple of ways.
Yeah, it's Imperial Seal for people that are scared of mental misstep. Like, it's just so bad. It's like, have you ever wanted to cast your Imperial Seal as though there was a Trinisphere in play? Like, here you go.
Gets around Trinisphere. You're already paying 3 forehead.
Yeah, forehead tap.
But really quickly, why are top of the deck tutors bad? Because you get the card next turn. That seems really powerful. What's the downside?
They're card negative, so you're spending a card from your hand and you're not getting access to the card you want until your next turn, and it takes up your draw step. So if your opponent is able to deal with it, you just chucked resources out the window. And it does also give your opponent time to deal with or plan for what you're going to do. Like the time you Enlightened Tutored and Ben knew what you were going to do. And so pretend your Vampiric Tutor was an Imperial Seal. If Ben had a way to deal with your Helm of Obedience, or in this case, Oblivion Ring, he could have planned for that. Like if he had a tutor in his deck, he could have tutored for the counter to your whatever you tutored for. And so in the war, it's like bringing a top of the deck tutor to a real tutor fight.
Yeah. So back when we all started playing Highlander, and I don't know what even time is anymore. Let's just estimate 5 years ago. A lot of the green decks were playing Worldly Tutor. Worldly Tutor, single green, instant, find a creature, put it on top of your deck. And that was great at the time. And a lot of the Magic players all agreed that, yeah, this is a card that you should have in your deck. And like all the blue decks are still playing Mystical Tutor. Some of the artifact and enchantment decks are playing Enlightened Tutor. What changes to make a tutor that used to be good bad?
Mostly just the speed of the format and the demands on the decks. Like it's the interaction is, we've talked a lot about how the interaction has been condensed into the first few turns. Like you can't afford to just like shove a bunch of 6-drops in your deck and be like, oh, eventually I'll draw these 6-drops and win the game. Like that's not the format we play anymore.
I remember playing against AP years ago. We don't like to give full names of people for private reasons, but if you're in the Victorian Magic community, you know who AP is. And he went like turn 2 Worldly Tutor, grabbed Eternal Witness, played Eternal Witness, returned Worldly Tutor to the hand. I was like, oh my God, I can't beat that value. And that was like the only threat on the board, right?
But it's not even value.
But he got the tutor back, and now I'm dying to this 2-1
But
Huh?
he didn't draw a card. Like he didn't do anything. He tempoed himself into the Stone Ages. Like he paid 3 mana for a 2/1.
Yeah, congratulations. Wait, this is like 8 turns.
That was a different time, right? It was a different time. I don't know. Wheeler, what do you think of top of the deck tutors?
Oh, I hate them. I cut so many of them. I don't play Enlightened Tutor in a lot of decks. I mean, some of them I will. Depends on how many colors I got. And, you know, if I have instant speed, like the capability of drawing a card at instant speed, I'm just going to go back to eggs because it's a classic. Like Enlightened Tutor was a card that was 1 point for so long. My deck is based off of having a bunch of cards that draw cards basically for free at instant speed, as well as like all your engines and kills are basically artifacts and enchantments. So it's like a ideal conditions, and it plays white. So like the ideal conditions where you're like, oh yeah, this is an Enlightened
Checks a
Tutor
lot
deck.
of boxes
Yeah,
here, right?
I can like, I'm a deck that can take advantage of that card so well and get around the downside of top of the deck tutors, but I don't play it because I could just play better things. Like it's just like, it's the fact that it creates a scenario where I have to do the work. Like don't make me do the extra work to get this card. That's the job of the tutor, right?
Yeah,
Like they're just too slow in my opinion.
I agree.
Any closing thoughts on tutors? We've talked about this a lot. I mean, to recap, we talked about what they are, the importance of deck construction and deck building to get it on, the importance of knowing your deck, be it through goldfishing, flow charts, literally Street Fighter Ken, you know, different packages and learning it, the different types to do. Anything you want to add onto this conversation?
Me like tutor, very good. Find redundant card.
Yeah, I don't mean to put you on the spot there with it. You know, we don't need like a button. I just thought we covered a lot of very interesting stuff here.
Just yeah, I don't know. I said it before. Don't get hung up if you have to cut like Bring to Light.
All right.
That's it.
Well, then, without further ado, let's go on to our closing segment, Powerful Magic. And up today, we have Wheeler. Wheeler, tell us a story of magical magic.
Of magical magic.
Yeah, I kind of whiffed that.
No, it's all good. I liked it. So this I don't even remember when this was. This was like ancient. Presumably, if we're talking, we started 5 years ago. This was before, like the land before time. And I was against if we're going with anonymity, I was against a former counselor, and we were in game 3 of, I think maybe it was I think we were X and 1 in this tournament, just like a weekly event. And so we are kind of just like joking around. We're like, look, neither of us are going to win this event. Blind 7 for like blind 7's game 3. So like where we just like we don't get to look at our hands, right? We for game 3 we just put 7 cards face down in front of us. We play Magic the Gathering. That's what we get. No mulligans, no nothing. Leave it up to like the
All right.
fates.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. I like it. I like it.
And I was playing a 5-color Cascade Stacks deck. Which I talked about, like it's been brought up on here before.
These rules favor some decks over others, and apparently you did not pick a deck that this was a great decision for.
Well, I mean, I've got mana acceleration. Like, if I draw a combination of like lands, talisman, and like I don't know, a planeswalker or like cascade card, like maybe it's okay. My opponent's playing a pattern rector deck, and I believe, I mean, maybe I'm like mixing up 2 different ones. But this happened in a blind 7, so they might not have been on pattern rector. But this happened in a blind 7 against this player, where I had a turn 2 Maelstrom Wanderer, I want to say.
Oh, baby. On a blind 7? Hold on. Can we talk about what is a Maelstrom Wanderer right now? Just if people don't know this beautiful Magic card.
Oh, it likes it when you call it Big Papa. It's a elemental legendary creature. 5 blue, red, green.
Sorry, how much mana?
5 blue, red, green.
8 mana on turn 2.
8 mana. Yeah, I mean, this deck was stupid, right? Like, I'm pretty sure I was paying more points for Sensei's Divining Top than I was for, like, Mana Vault.
Back when top was pointed, eh? All right, what else does this card do?
So it's 8 mana, 7/5 legendary creature. It's an elemental. It says creatures you control have haste, cascade, cascade. A card that one Serge Yager actually gifted a pretty foil version of to me.
Do you still have that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'm so flattered.
I don't play with it. I keep it in my, like, collection cards do not ruin, Ben. So it's up there, but yes, I still have it. Anyways, I got this card out on turn 2 by some disgusting play of, like, there was a mana vault involved. There were talismans, a voltaic key. Like, a blind 7 is not super different from seeing your 7-card hand. You're like, oh, I'll keep this, right? But, like, it was just so perfect. It was kind of just like, oh, yeah, haha, like, I hope this works. And then it's like, oh, gross. And I cascaded into Tezzeret, like 5 mana Tezzeret and Karn, I believe. Karn Liberated.
To hit 2 planeswalkers?
Yeah, it was either Karn Liberated or that 7 mana Garrick. The, like, black-green Garrick.
I'm pretty sure it was
I don't know
Karn.
if that black-green Garrick
was
out
it Karn?
At that point.
Okay,
yeah.
I think
I remember the Karn story there. Oh my god.
Okay, yeah, so it was Karn Tezzeret. And so I got rid of their land and found, I think I was playing Time Vault in that version too. So I found Time Vault, and there was no coming back from that. So yeah, that was that. I just had that on the mind of like, wow. I was looking at a Maelstrom Wanderer and it's like, oh yeah, this'll count for powerful Magic. Very gross. The old days of Highlander were...
They were a different time. Time.
It was just a weird combination of you'd have decks that could do stuff like that, but then you also just have decks where it's just like... So anyways, the idea behind my strategy is that every 3 turns I get to cast Imperial Seal or Cruel Tutor, right? It's just like, oh, okay. Or Necrotol. Like every other turn I get to Necrotol my opponent's creatures. It's like, wow, that's busted.
Feeling attacked once again. I love it.
Sorry.
That's
you like
all
that?
good. That's all good. You know, some people brew decks differently. Some people win on turn 2, and some people loop Necrotol every 4 turns. You know, it's fine. It's fine. All right, friends. Thank you very, very much for listening to today's episode. Want to remind you this podcast is brought to you by you with your support over the Patreon at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. I've been Serge. Thank you very much to Jer and Wheeler, and we will see you next time, friends. Bye-bye.